In this video, I will introduce the controller factory. This allows your JavaFX controllers to have constructors with parameters, which comes with various benefits. I have another video where I introduce something I call the controller configurator, but I think the approach of this video is more correct and aligns more with the official recommendations. Therefore, I have reverted my OK-Reads application to a previous state, and I can redo the relevant parts. Let's just get an overview of our starting point. I have my OK-Reads application. There is currently only the view manager, and I have a couple of controllers. When a new view should be shown, the showView method is called. This will load the fxml file, instantiate the associated controller, and set the resulting parent node as the current view. Each of my controllers need access to some data, so they each instantiate their own data manager. We can see this here in the add author controller. It implements the initializable interface, which means I must override the initialize method down here. And this method just creates a new instance of the list data manager. Each of the controllers do something similar. This introduces a few problems. The first problem, currently each controller uses a list data manager. Eventually I want to store my data in a file instead of in memory in lists. And even more eventually, I might want to use a database, but that is out of scope for now. This means instead of creating a list data manager, I must create a file data manager. And I have to update 5 of my controllers. This is annoying. Instead, I want to have a single place which defines which type of data manager is used, so it is easier to swap out. You will see this in a moment. Other problems include testability, which I won't cover, and tighter coupling between classes, which I won't go into details either at this point. Usually when a class needs another class to work, this is done by creating a constructor with the relevant parameters. I will just show this in the add author controller. Let me update it here. I don't need the initializable interface, nor the method. The responsibility of this method is moved to the constructor now. I introduce a constructor which receives a data manager. Notice the type is that of the interface, not any concrete implementation. Later I will update the other classes in a similar manner, introduce a constructor in each of them, and potentially update the use of the initializable interface. And now the first problem. In the view manager, the fxml loader must create a new instance of the controller class, my add author controller. That controller class now requires an instance of the data manager, but the fxml loader does not know how to handle this. So first a minor update. I need an instance of the fxml loader. Then setting the location, and I must tell the fxml loader how each of my controllers should be instantiated. I do that by providing a controller factory before loading anything. This is done by calling the set controller factory on the loader instance before we load anything. The controller factory is just a class which implements a specific interface called a callback. If I bring up the documentation, I can see this interface has generic type parameters, the ones between the chevrons here. Similar to how the array list also defines the type it contains. It is perhaps a bit convoluted. This is about the topic of generics. I will not go into details here. Just declare the interface as you will see me doing in a moment. The generic type parameters mean that given some type of class, it returns an object. Or more specifically, what happens is that provided the type of the controller factory should then return an instance of that controller. The controller factory class then needs only a single method. Input is the controller type, output is the controller instance of that type. I add a new instance of my controller factory here. I don't have that class yet, so let me just create it. I will make it implement the interface callback of class and object, and then I implement the method. we observe once again the parameter is a type of class. The return type is just object, but it must be an instance of the required controller. And what follows now is a sequence of if statements to figure out which specific controller type is requested. If the controller type is that of add author controller, I can create a new instance. Here I am using the constructor, which requires a data manager. So let me create a new instance of the list data manager. Now I have to check for the other controller types and create instances. This will initially not compile because my other controllers have not been updated accordingly, but I will fix that afterwards. So I chain together if statements, creating the relevant controllers. Good, that's all the possible controllers I currently have. Whenever a new view and controller is added to the system, I will have to add a new if statement. Finally, let me just throw an exception here if the requested controller type is not supported. This means I have just forgotten to update this method with another if statement after having added a new view. The user should never experience this. And I throw the exception here because instead the fxml loader will give me some obscure error if it does not get a controller as it needs. Okay, currently for each controller I create a new list data manager. I will just extract this into a method. Like so. Now across my entire application there is only a single place in my code where a new instance of a data manager is created. Next, I need to fix the compile errors by updating each of the controllers. The add book controller gets a constructor. So from the initialize method, I can remove the instantiation of the data manager and move the field variable assignment to their constructor. I can also make the field variable final now, because it is not reassigned after the controller is instantiated. This is a minor detail, but it just adds clarity and safety. I prefer to do this when possible. I still need the initialize method because after the controller has been created, the fxml loader sets all the field variables for the UI elements. And then the initialize method is called. And I need all the field variables correctly set before I can add the data to them. So there is an order to things. First, the controller is created using the constructor setting the data manager. Then the field variables are assigned. And then the initialize method is called. Next, let's fix the add shelf controller. I will add the constructor. And because the initialize method is doing nothing other than creating the data manager, I can just remove it, along with the implements declaration at the top. This controller does not need to do any work after it is created and set up. Next, let's check the main view controller. This class actually doesn't need anything, so there's nothing to fix here. Moving on to the select shelf controller. Here is the constructor. And removing the data manager instantiation from the initialize method. I still need the initialize method to load the shelves. Finally, the view shelf controller. Same procedure, add a constructor, which accepts and sets the data manager, and update the initialize method accordingly. Here we actually see a fourth step in the setup. This is the string argument which is being set down here. For this controller, the order of actions is as follows. First, the controller is instantiated using the constructor. Second, the fields are assigned. Third, the initialize method is called. And fourth, the set argument method is called. I have now updated all the controllers and everything should actually still work. Well, almost. I have a final modification to make in the view manager, because I need to update the other show view method, and I forgot something in the first show view method. So here just set the controller factory before loading anything. Let's just do a quick test by running the program and adding some data to verify everything still works. And that seems to be okay. So what have we achieved? I have created a controller factory, which allows me to add constructors to the controllers. This then allows me to provide the controllers with whatever classes they require to function. In most cases here, that's just the data manager. Each controller knows only about the data manager interface, not which concrete type is actually used. Currently, I just have the list data manager, but if I wanted to update my application to store the data in a file, I can create a file data manager class. And the only change required is to update the single place where the data manager is created. Then my entire application uses a file data manager instead. Now you might notice that all controllers are created in the same way, they just need a data manager. Maybe something could be simplified by using some shared superclass. However, as the application grows, you might find some of your controllers require other classes. Maybe a user manager to track who is logged in, or some class to share data between two controllers. And then the constructors begin to be different from one another. This approach is more future-proof. I have some ideas for updates to this class, but I will save that for another video. For now, thanks for watching.